Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome in to the GSMC Football Podcast. Right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host with the most. No, it's not from my boy Ethan. On the GSMC Football Podcast. And obviously, you know what we do here. We talk about everything football. You know, we sit here, you take time out of your day, you listen to me, which I appreciate every single one of you listening. To talk about football, things that are happening in the league, stories, discussions, all types of things, because we all love the sport. Obviously, the sport obviously has decisions to make when their season comes back around in the fall. So obviously, you know, I'm here to give you updates on that so I can keep you updated on what they're thinking, what the plan is, and how everybody's feeling. I mean, I think that's really the big thing here when it comes to things like that. But so, in regards to that as well, Curly, we're going to get right into the news. Obviously, we have a very jam-packed show for you today. We're going to talk a lot of different things, a lot of different teams, news, proposals, players, all of it. You already know what we do here on the GSMC Football Podcast. And obviously, you know, we're going to hit the ground running. We're going to hit the ground running. So, to start off, reports have said that the Jets and Jamal Adams have reached a stalemate in contract negotiations. Obviously, Jamal Adams is probably considered, if not the best safety, one of the top safeties in the game. So obviously, he's probably looking for top safety money. Seems like if they're hitting a stalemate, the Jets seem hesitant to pay him that kind of money. Obviously, this has been something that's been lingering for a while. This has been something you've even heard since last offseason, that Jamal Adams and the Jets haven't necessarily seen eye to eye on the contract. They've all considered, you know, oh, maybe we should move off of him. Maybe we should stay. Things like that. And so a lot of different things have happened with them in between now and then. And so, obviously, with that question being out there, you know, listen, if Jamal Adams does get traded, you know, I know plenty of teams would love to have him because of the fact that, you know, he is such an impact player. I'm not sure if you're going to potentially get that Minkah Fitzpatrick impact, but you're going to get an impact guy who can man your secondary and cover some of the best tight ends in the league. I think one team we need to look out for, even though from a cap perspective it wouldn't make sense, but just because they might have a need at safety during the season, if this goes into the season, we might have to look at the Atlanta Falcons. Because if Keanu Neal does not come back and be the same Keanu Neal or does not stay healthy, I feel like the Falcons would obviously have to make a decision on clearly moving off of him and going out and getting a Pro Bowl safety while they're still in trying to be a win now kind of team would be a great addition, I think. I also could see the Patriots swooping in there. Obviously, I know it's an AFC East rival, so that may be a least likely thing to happen, but they could potentially be in the market. Remember, the only thing that's really changed about the Patriots is everything else but their secondary. Their secondary is still the exact same. It's still a good secondary. It was one of the best secondaries in the AFC. They haven't necessarily changed in terms of players in the AFC. So, if you look at it, you know, they could do it. Maybe Philadelphia takes a flyer on Jamal Adams, manning their secondary. You're getting Darius Slay and Jamal Adams to boost your secondary in Philadelphia, which has been a problem for years there. I mean, listen, that could put them back in Super Bowl contention, even though they're already a Super Bowl contending team, but maybe more of a favorite. So, and maybe even the Cowboys, you might see Jerry Jones, even though if they did give Jamal Adams a big contract, how would that affect Dak's deal? Jerry Jones may be someone who says, listen, Jamal Adams would be great with the star on his head. And he could be that big playmaker to replace really Byron Jones. Even though he's a safety, because they really didn't sign that many people to replace their secondary players. So perhaps maybe bringing him in maybe puts the Cowboys in a better position at the end of the day to potentially be a team that, even with all the losses that they have suffered this offseason, can still come back and be one of the best teams in the NFC. So it really just depends on who really wants out there. Because obviously it feels like, and there's been this energy from the Jets when it comes to Jamal Adams, is that they're not even 100% sure if they even really want him themselves. Like, it feels like for a guy who's been your best defensive player for the last couple of years, and the fact that we're still having an issue with the whole, okay, are we paying him or not, sounds like the Jets have some reservations about it. And obviously you have to think about it. You know, Adam Gase, I mean, obviously I don't know how he feels about him. Clearly, you know, we know how he feels about Le'Veon, but maybe he's one of the people who's like, I wouldn't pay a safety that much money. So we don't know really what's the holdup in New York and why there is a hesitation to go ahead and pay Jamal Adams the money that he wants. Could it be that he's demanding more money than any safety has gotten? So then it's just like, okay, well, all of you want big money, and we can't pay you because you want to reset the market. We're not someone who wants to reset the market currently. So it's just a very interesting situation, a very interesting topic moving forward. But also moving forward with some news, the NFL Rules Committee, obviously, the onside kick was moved, I think, back, where basically it really became hard to recover. Because I guess teams thought it was too easy, I guess, to recover the onside kick before, and then they wanted to make it more difficult, and so then they decided to say, okay, we're going to make it harder, and then nobody can recover onside kick. So now they have a new rule that's kind of gaining some traction that I think a lot of people would like, where if you want the ball back and you want an onside kick, you have to convert a 4th and 15. Obviously, this would give people a chance, like if Mahomes from that playoff game years ago was able to get that 4th and 15 against Brady. Remember, we know how the Chiefs' offense is. That may be like a walk in the park for them to convert something like that. But it's going to benefit a lot of teams because now you can put your game in the hands of your defense if they shut them down. You know, because they're looking at it like, listen, if we can keep them covered from making the first down, we got it. But obviously for the offense, they know, well, if we can get a big play, not only we can get a big play, maybe even get closer to the goal, but now we also have the ball back after just scoring on our last possession. It definitely it adds a new strategy to the game. Most definitely with that. So obviously I think that's going to be something that's really cool and really, you know, I think with them doing it is going to help create a better chance for more exciting plays and not depending on an onside kick where, especially now with the rules the way they are now, it seems very, very unlikely you can even recover one, realistically. So, and I mean, obviously, listen, they changed the onside kick rule to limit collisions, but obviously in doing that, you've also kind of hurt the other team from recovering. So maybe this is the best alternative at the end of the day. I'm in favor of this rule. I think this rule should pass. I think a lot of people would agree with me, as obviously, like I said, it gives both teams a fair opportunity. And it doesn't feel like, okay, one side. I mean, you can still say the defensive side is still favored, clearly, because it's 4th and 15. But it feels like a more of a realistic thing that can happen. A team converting a 4th and 15 than a team recovering an onside kick with everybody within 5 yards of each other and basically still can't move till it even gets on their side of the field. So obviously those are things that will be looked at. Hopefully, maybe that rule can maybe get passed and get implemented this season. If not, obviously 2021 season when they go to 17 games and 3 preseason games, and then they do the onside kick rule, and you have all the full implements, and obviously hopefully by that time Corona will be as big as an issue in about a year around this time, and everything would just be in a better place overall in terms of the NFL landscape and football landscape in general. But coming up next on the podcast, there's a Tom Brady documentary that ESPN is producing in 2021. What are my thoughts on that podcast? And also, with Big Ben back on the Steelers, does that make them a playoff contender? And if we have time, we're also going to get into the college football. Should they come back or should they stay home? All that right here and more on the podcast.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we discussed Jamal Adams potentially being traded by the Jets as their contract negotiations have hit a stalemate. Obviously, I discussed the Jets and Jamal Adams keep heading a stalemate, so clearly something just isn't right. Something just isn't right between the two when it comes to negotiations of contracts, because it feels like this was going on for a while. And we also talked about the rule changes potentially, as there is momentum behind changing the onside kick rule to now a 4th and 15 on 4th down for a team to recover the ball instead of the traditional onside kick. Now the onside kicks have basically literally became impossible to recover. So obviously they're trying to make the game more exciting and better, obviously, at the end of the day, and leave less doubt in people's minds in terms of, oh yeah, they're going to recover the onside kick. It's clear, and more, okay, are we going to get this 4th and 15? I'm excited. I'm hype. I'm ready. Obviously you try to make the game more exciting, so obviously that's going to be a big deal at the end of the day. So ESPN is going to make a documentary on Tom Brady that will be released in 2021, basically highlighting some of the moments in his career, revelations about him, basically more of an in-depth look into Tom Brady, how he's felt through some of his best moments and worst moments. And I'm sure they're going to be filming into this season with Tampa Bay, as obviously this is a new chapter in his life, and ESPN would not be dumb to not have that in the documentary. So obviously what happens in Tampa Bay, they'll have too. And honestly, one thing about The Last Dance and the one thing about, these documentaries, it really shows you that cameras are always rolling with these athletes. Always. Like, you just think they're coming in here just living regular life, but cameras are always rolling. Because it's crazy how they have footage from 6 years ago about conversations you really never see, and now they have it all of a sudden. It really just shows you there's so much stuff being recorded we don't know what's actually been caught on tape and what's actually not actually on tape. But I think if they make this Tom Brady documentary, I think that's the one player a lot of people would love to see an in-depth documentary on. Because obviously, since he's considered the GOAT in terms of quarterbacks in the NFL, obviously you just did one on the GOAT in basketball, Michael Jordan. Well, how would we get the GOAT quarterback in Tom Brady and do an in-depth documentary? I believe they said it was a 6-part documentary. I could be wrong. I believe it was 6 parts, though. And if it's a 6-part documentary, well, shoot, that's going to be pretty good if it's 6 parts. That means you're going to probably get maybe a episode a week, probably, I would think. And potentially, it depends on how far along they want it to go, but I think it'd be a very cool documentary to see. I mean, Tom Brady seems like he has an interesting life, and his career's been interesting. Obviously, like I said, with the New England drama that started years ago, I think obviously everybody's going to be more wanting to see if they can get more in-depth stuff, more dirt on what happened with that relationship between Belichick, him and Kraft, with the Jimmy Garoppolo, then those years after that leading to this year, clearly, because obviously I think that's the juicy stuff. That's what everybody wants to see. Everybody wants to know, what happened. Do we get more of an in-depth insight look on it? Can we see, what actually happened during these time periods? What was he thinking? What was he doing? Things like that. Because obviously that in-depth access is why these documentaries become so popular over time. Because of the fact that clearly people want to know what's really going on. What's really going on? So obviously it'll be interesting and very exciting to see that Tom Brady documentary come out next year. Also, question has been raised. Now that Ben Bennett is back with the Steelers, does that make them a contender? Now, I touched on this a bit on our Tuesday episode with Ethan. And I said with Pittsburgh, they're a big what if to me because you don't know how Ben's going to look and you don't know how the receivers around Big Ben are going to look. Because you have to think about, last year was the first year without Le'Veon or Antonio Brown. And Juju became the number one and you had a lot of other new receivers. Only person that he really been throwing to that has been there for a while was Vance McDonald. So it became a question of, okay, Juju obviously was hurt last year, but also didn't have the best first year as the number one receiver. You have other receivers that had their moments at times last year, but can they be more consistent? And then, like I said, how is Big Ben going to look after the season-ending Tommy John surgery? How is he going to come back out and do? How is he going to throw the ball? What is his timing with these guys? There's a lot of things that have a lot of questions here at Pittsburgh. Obviously, Pittsburgh has one of the best defenses in the NFL. But they have to be able to score points offensively for them to really take that step and potentially dethrone Baltimore in the AFC North. So clearly it's going to make a big difference to see on Ben's performance and if Ben can really get over the top and can really be the quarterback that we all know Big Ben to be, which has always been a guy who has been considered an elite guy, a guy who's always been considered in the top tier of quarterbacks and obviously shown when he has weapons, he can light it up with the best of them. So a lot of things are hinging in terms of Pittsburgh's playoff hopes, Pittsburgh's winning hopes on his shoulders. Big Ben is 38 now, so it'll also be very interesting to see, could he potentially fall off a cliff? Could he potentially, have a decline in his play? Because people were wondering, obviously Mason Rudolph doesn't like the answer. So would they try to potentially find another quarterback to replace Big Ben? And obviously they didn't do it in this year's draft. So obviously some people are wondering, When is Pittsburgh maybe going to make the initiative to try to see, okay, when do we start to put a plan in place to potentially have a guy to replace Big Ben after he retires, potentially? So a lot of that's going to be on the minds of a lot of people in Pittsburgh, but obviously we'll have to see what happens this year with Pittsburgh and Ben Roethlisberger, and if he can stay healthy on top of that as well. Lastly, there's been a lot of debate between college football. Obviously, it's been reported that if the college football season was canceled, they would lose $4 billion, the Power Five, which is almost half of their operating spend, like money. Obviously, you've already seen schools cutting other programs because of that. And so, and they're having, discussions. College football stadiums are huge. 80, 100,000 people can go in these stadiums. And if you want fans there in August and September and so on, how many people do you let into the stadium? Who can come into the stadium? It's like, it's kind of crazy to think an 80,000 person stadium to just 20,000, which is still a good crowd. By no stretch of the imagination, that's not like that's a bad number. But it's just like, is it worth it? And like somebody asked from the Big 12, are fans really going to want to go to stadiums knowing, yeah, even if there's still 20,000 people we could be sharing things with, touching the same things with, everything. You really have to establish a lot of rules, and you really have to establish a lot of different regulations to potentially make it work. So it's definitely something that's going to be very difficult, something that's going to be tough, something that is not going to be easy. I think college football have to be, and every person from every conference has to be very careful about what they're doing. You don't want to put your players at risk because, like they've said, these players ain't getting paid like they are in the NFL. These are just college students trying to potentially get to the NFL or complete their degree, and they would like to not get COVID-19 just trying to play a sport. Because that's one question I think people don't ask. Well, how do some players feel? Will you have certain college athletes say, I'm not playing because of COVID? It's something that college football is going to have to figure out. And I'm sure they've already allowed players to come back to campus June 1st, I believe, or July 1st, like either one. So it's just going to be interesting to see what happens and how they play it when it's all said and done. But coming up next, Josh Gordon looking for reinstatement from the NFL, and Michael Thomas and Devontae Parker beef on IG. Are players too sensitive nowadays? All that right here and more on the podcast.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we discussed college football potentially coming back, some of the issues they could potentially run into with that. Obviously, some of the questions they have to answer is obviously they have a lot of money, as all of these leagues are, on the line in terms of bringing back people to the stadiums, like fans, and also putting players at risk. We also talked about the Tom Brady documentary that's supposed to come out in 2021. Obviously, if you're a Tom Brady fan, I've always been intrigued by Tom Brady, his career. This is obviously something I know that you probably are looking forward to, trying to get more of an insight, depth look into his career and things that he happened during the times that he had some of his worst and best moments. And I also talk about, are the Steelers going to be a more competitive team with Big Ben back? It all depends on how Big Ben is and if the weapons around him are good enough to give him what he used to have when he had AB and Le'Veon and all of them. So all of that was what we talked about last segment. Now we're going into this segment. And we're going to talk about Josh Gordon. He's going for reinstatement again. So, listen. The man's been reinstated like 3-4 times. Every time he comes back, something happens. Drug-related, PED, something. Obviously, Josh Gordon was a guy that, obviously in Cleveland, he had the talent to be one of the best receivers in this game. And just with the suspensions, it kept hindering. Now he's older, so he doesn't have the exact same talent he had before. And now you have to gauge, okay, is he a guy who can still help us now? Or is he a guy who's kind of washed up and et cetera, et cetera? It's a very good question. It's an extremely good question. Because some people are probably tired of Josh Gordon. They're probably like, listen, keeps getting in trouble, can't do it, just stop. Some people are like, listen, the last couple of times that he's been suspended, he kind of already went ahead and said, I did it before it even came out sometimes. So it was like, okay, well, at least he's admitting to it. So it's not like he's hiding and then it happens. He's admitting to it and he's not backing away from the issue. It really just depends on how you feel. Like I said, I'm sure some people are tired of Josh Gordon. They're tired of hearing about him. They're tired of hearing about the same consistent story, him being restated. You don't know who would even pick him up this year. Last team he was with was Seattle. We don't know, would Seattle take him back? Does another team want him? I mean, these are a lot of questions. Remember, him and then Alton Smith just got restated. So clearly, he's going to get some play time. I believe the Cowboys signed him. Obviously, he hasn't played in the league since, 2016? We don't know what type of shape he's in. We don't know what he's going to look like. We don't know if he can still be the same Alton Smith. Like, a lot of people are getting reinstated this year that maybe have been in the league that you might have forgotten about for a while. Just trust me, nobody thought about Josh Gordon until today. Nobody thought about Alton Smith until he got signed by the Cowboys a couple of months ago. It's just a very big amount of just like, okay. I see what's going on. I see what's happening here. It's very interesting to me. I think we'll have to see what happens with both players. Like I said, Alton's battled his demons. He's been away from the game for 4 years. Gordon feels like he's ready to come back now. We're going to have to see how things turn out. We're going to have to see how things work out. Because, you never know. Maybe this time around, they both can get themselves straight. And even if they can't be the player they used to be, if they could still contribute to a team, any team they go to, and obviously in Alton's case, the Cowboys, it'd still be beneficial, for any team and those players in the league. Just showing the league has the ability to keep giving a guy a chance, and then showing that, it's still possible that, somebody can change their ways and be put in a better position at the end of the day. Because obviously that's something that I'm sure a lot of people wonder about. I'm very well sure of it. So that'll be interesting. But so here's the thing. Devontae Parker, Michael Thomas, beefing on IG. We love beefs. As people, we love chaos. That's just facts. But obviously, what caused this argument was there was a post. Would it be harder to stop a Michael Thomas pass, like throwing the ball to Mike Evans? Would it be harder to break that up, or catching a ball on Stephon Gilmore? Devontae Parker said Stephon Gilmore. Obviously, if you think about this as a logical person, he is a wide receiver who goes against Stephon Gilmore twice a year. Of course, he would say Stephon Gilmore. What is he supposed to say? And you may sit here and think, well, Devontae Parker really, tore up him, so you could have made an argument that maybe he had an easy day against him, so he could say Michael Thomas. No. Well, Michael Thomas have a history on the past on social media being somewhat sensitive to certain things and calling out people and going after people on social media. So he went after Devontae Parker and basically was just like, at the end of it, you can't sit at the table. And a lot of people obviously started to get on Michael Thomas. A lot of people take Devontae Parker's side because it was uncalled for. He didn't say anything disrespectful. But for some reason, Michael Thomas was sensitive to it. And he kind of reminds me of the NFL's version of KD. How KD, we look at as very sensitive, replies to people on Twitter and social media, responds to things. That's what Michael Thomas is. So obviously a lot of people are, I don't want to say losing respect for Michael Thomas, but they're just kind of like, dude, why are you up in arms? Why are you in your feelings about stuff like this? It's not like this man directly said Michael Thomas sucks. Maybe it's just a grudge he's holding against Devontae Parker for maybe getting drafted ahead of him. I don't know. It's one of those things where you gotta look at it. Regardless of what you think, I think we all can agree Michael Thomas is the better receiver out of the two. But there is an argument to be made. Michael Thomas gets a lot of his catches within like 10 yards. And so that's where some people were kind of like, listen, Devontae, a 5-yard pass usually is not that hard to complete. It's always the ones that are down the field that are harder to complete. And you make it sound like, you do everything. You're the best receiver. I can't believe anybody would ever say it's easy or thinks it's not as easy to break up a pass from me. And it was just kind of like, what are you doing, Michael? What are you doing? Why are you taking offense to this? It was never meant to be offense to you. It's crazy how I'm sure other people in that comment section were saying Parker was right, or they were saying Michael Thomas was not the hardest one in that situation with Stephon Gilmore, catching one on Stephon Gilmore. And maybe other players we can weighed in, but for some reason when Devontae said something, you were triggered. That's just very interesting to me to see that, because it makes you kind of wonder what caused him to go off. And, it brings up a question. Are players too sensitive? with social media, I think, here's the thing to me. Social media is easier to really kind of get your opinion out there because it's at the tip of your fingertips. Like back in the day, you didn't have social media, so if something offended you, you would have to go out of your way to make a statement about it or to say something about it. And usually you would hear it, sometimes with interviews, oh, they'll take a shot. Right? Social media, now if you hear something, you can instantly respond to it at that very second on social media. And I think sometimes that's why I think some players get labeled sensitive in the media, because they reply to it quickly, and so that means they're bothered. But you don't know how many players maybe back when they were bothered by something, and then think about it, you have time in between the next time you actually can make a statement, okay, I'm not gonna, you know what, that happened, I'm not gonna go after it, I'm not gonna say anything about it, I'm gonna let it go. So I think we gotta be careful with that sensitive word. Because you gotta understand, with social media, it's much easier to reply to things, and you don't have to take the things that you didn't have to take before. So it's going to be very interesting what happens. But coming up next, we're going to talk about Devontae Freeman turning down an offer from the Seahawks. And we're also going to play a game called Kirk or Who. I'm going to say Kirk Cousins and a quarterback, and I'll tell you which one I take. All that right here and more on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we discussed Josh Gordon being reinstated. As he's already applied for reinstatement, we're going to see if maybe the NFL gives him another chance to come back, hopefully end his career on a good note, and be able to play football without any more issues. And also the NFL also reinstated Alton Smith too, so now the Cowboys have their guy that they expect to come back. Even though it's been years since he's played, they expect to make an impact. We also talked about the beef between Devontae Parker and Michael Thomas. Are players too sensitive today? I'd explain that I feel like, obviously it's a little different from now and then. It's much easier for a player to respond to something they don't like sooner than it was back in the day. So obviously that could provide more of a people to think, oh, people are more sensitive. And also just, what Michael Thomas kind of did was kind of uncalled for. Maybe he can be a little sensitive, but we'll have to see if he continues this. He's starting to maybe get a little bit of a mark of a social media troll potentially. So we'll have to see what happens with that. But now we're going to talk about some news for getting into the game that I have for this segment. Devontae Freeman, former Atlanta Falcons running back, declined a 1-year, 4-year offer from the Seahawks. Obviously, the Seahawks made this deal to him because they thought Rashad Penny wouldn't be healthy, and people were very intrigued by the fact that Devontae Freeman turned it down. Now, people wonder, why would you turn it down? Now, you got to think about it. Seattle has Rashad Penny, Chris Carson, and I believe they have someone else. I can't come off the top of my head who it is, but they kind of have 3 guys they like. Bringing in Devontae Parker to this deal is more, not Devontae Parker, but Devontae Freeman to this deal is more of a, we just need you temporarily. And I feel like Devontae Parker, why do I keep saying Devontae Parker? Devontae Freeman feels like, well, if you think about it, I don't want to be buried on the depth chart. I want a chance where I could probably play. Now, the Eagles have showed some interest in him, and I believe the Lions have as well. So those are 2 teams that you might need to keep an eye on with Devontae Freeman. After signing that big contract in Atlanta, injuries derailed his career, and he was never the exact same player, even though he's had good games. He's a guy who can catch out of the backfield and make some pretty good runs for you, so he definitely still has some value as a running back at this point in his career. It's just a matter of getting into the right situation. And if he can get into the right situation and succeed, that will put him in a good spot, which would then provide, obviously a higher degree of success potentially moving forward. So, there you go. But now we're going to get to the game that I have planned for the rest of this segment, called Kurt or Who. I'm going to say a random quarterback, and I'm going to tell you if I'd rather pick that quarterback or Kirk Cousins. Obviously, Kirk Cousins gets a lot of scrutiny, so I know some people may be intrigued to see, okay, well, who would you take Kirk Cousins over at the end of the day? So, first quarterback, Kirk Cousins or Jared Goff? I would go with Goff in this situation, but I do think they are similar. When given weapons, they can put up big numbers. I think Goff is a better thrower of the football than Kurt. But Goff has played so-so in big games. Obviously, Cousins has never really played great in big games. And that may be the edge I give him. Plus, I do, like I said, feel like he's a better... I feel you would trust Jared Goff more than you would trust a Kirk Cousins. Because when Jared Goff didn't show up, it was in the Super Bowl. When Kirk Cousins doesn't show off, it could be Monday Night Football during the regular season. So obviously that makes a difference. Kirk Cousins or Teddy Bridgewater. So I would go Teddy because I know what I'm getting with Teddy week in and week out, and it's consistent enough to win with it. Like Teddy has won in this league. He's won games. Kurt, you don't know what you're getting week in and week out. So you don't know if you're going to get a good performance or you're going to get a terrible performance. And so obviously that inconsistency to me gives Teddy Bridgewater the advantage in that situation because Teddy is a much more consistent quarterback than Kirk. Kirk Cousins or Mitchell Trubisky? I'm going to go with Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, again, has shown when Kirk Cousins is on it, he could play like some of the best quarterbacks in the league. He could probably, like a performance for him could be like one of the best in all of the NFL. Where Mitchell, we have never seen him really ball out like he was an elite quarterback in one game. Really. We've seen games where he's been good, and we've seen games where he's been average, but we haven't seen those games that Kirk Cousins can have. Kirk Cousins is like, yeah, you can get that really bad game, but you can get that really good game. And to me, I'd rather have that than a guy who at best will be average most games, and we hope that we get a good game out of him. So I will go with Kurt in that situation. Kirk Cousins or Matt Ryan? I'll go with Matt here. Matt's more of a consistent quarterback. Good pre-snap. Good accuracy. You know, for me, if Matt Ryan was on Minnesota might have won a championship in my opinion the last 2-3 years. If you had replaced him, just because Matt could have a bad game, but it's more likely with him that he'll have a good game with those weapons that he had. Because listen, Matt, she's shown you what he can do with weapons. He can light up an offense. He can light it up. And with the Vikings, with that running game, and when they had Stephon Diggs and Thielen, Matt Ryan probably could have put on the show in Minnesota. So I definitely would think I would take Matt Ryan in that situation over Kirk Cousins in terms of quarterbacks. Then you have Kirk Cousins or Dak Prescott. I'm going to go with Dak because to me, again, Dak is more of a consistent player where Kurt is too much of a roller coaster. And Dak usually will have good games more than average or bad games. Like, Dak doesn't really have a lot of those super bad games. Like I said, Kurt can have like a terrible game where it just seems like he can't do anything. Where Dak usually never has a game like that. It's usually an average game. If he does have a below average game, it's like an average game. But Dak on a good day is like 250, 2 touchdowns. That's not bad. I'd rather have that than a guy that's like most games, which means that will provide probably also more wins in that situation. So, Kirk or Baker Mayfield. So, if you ask this question after Baker's rookie season and you saw what he did, I think a lot of people would take Baker, but I'm going to take Kurt because there just isn't enough to say. With Kurt, you have a sample size, so you know what he can and cannot do. Baker, you see one good year, you see one bad year. And listen, Kurt's still in the league. If Baker struggles this year, he might be out as a starting quarterback after this year. Obviously, by that point, it's going to be hard to say you take Baker over Kurt. So I'm going to go with Kirk here because even though both these quarterbacks can be wildly inconsistent, that's one thing. Both of these quarterbacks can be very wildly inconsistent with their play. And so, to me, that creates an issue. So it just is a matter of, okay, well, who could be the most consistent the most usually? And I'll go with Kirk. Because Baker is more of a turnover machine than Kirk Cousins is. When Baker has a bad game, he can turn the ball over 5 times in the game. And obviously that's something you probably don't want on your team if you're trying to win. So I'll definitely take Kirk. And, you know, I've enjoyed this game. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue this next segment. So stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we discussed Devontae Freeman turning down a deal to join the Seahawks, but he does have teams interested in joining or bringing him on. So we'll see if maybe later on and closer to training camp if somebody actually brings in a Devontae Freeman. We also started a game called Kurt or Who, a game that I created. Just, have a little fun on here, just have a little bit of joy. And I really like the game, so we're going to go ahead and continue with this segment. We're going to go ahead and talk about more quarterbacks compared to Kurt and who I would take. Obviously, again, I love y'all to be interactive. If y'all want to tweet us, you can tweet us on our social media on Twitter or Facebook. Or you can leave a review, maybe, if you want. Obviously, give us 5 stars, but leave a review as well. And say, well, I don't agree. Well, I agree. Anything. Yeah. Because I'm sure this is some of the stuff that you may sit in the car when I'm saying this or wherever you're listening to this to and be like, So now we're going to continue on. And so now it's Kirk or Lamar Jackson. Obviously, in this situation, you're going with Lamar Jackson. Lamar is exceptional at running. He's probably the best running quarterback potentially in the NFL history if he continues at this pace. And he's also a very accurate passer. Outside of his rookie year, we never really, last year, saw a down Lamar Jackson. A wildly inconsistent. You pretty much got the same consistent great Lamar Jackson week after week. And obviously, that consistency is what's going to really separate you in this league if you could be consistently good on a week-to-week basis. Which, again, that is something that Kirk Cousins, you sometimes just don't know what you're going to get. Kirk Cousins or Jarrett Stidham. Obviously, you're going to go with Kirk just because we don't have enough of a sample size on Jarrett Stidham to know if he could be better than Kirk Cousins. I mean, obviously, some people don't have the highest expectations for him this season. They think he's not really that good. They think he might falter this season. So, clearly, you know, not everybody's a Jarrett Stidham fan. And obviously, like I said, Kirk's still in the league. He's still getting paid. He can win you some games. With that being known, you kind of got to go with Kirk. You don't really have much of a reason not to go with Kirk Cousins in this situation over Jarrett Stidham. But if Jarrett Stidham plays well, if we play this game a year from now, then maybe it might be different. Kirk Cousins or Ryan Fitzpatrick. Now this is interesting to me because they kind of remind me a little bit of each other. Because, you know, Ryan Fitzpatrick, when he's on it, it looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But when he's bad, he's bad. And it's kind of the same as Kirk. When he's on it, he's one of the best in the NFL. But when he's bad, he's bad. And you know, I mean, I guess you have to go with Kurt because he's just won more games in his career. You know, like Kurt is a starting quarterback. Fitz has always been a top backup quarterback who could start if needed. And with that, you kind of got to go with, obviously, Kirk in that situation because of that fact. Because you just don't have enough of a justifiable case to go with Ryan Fitzpatrick over a Kirk Cousins in that situation, even though we've seen them obviously at their best and we've seen them both at their worst. Clearly. So, then, Kirk Cousins or Carson Wentz. Obviously, Carson Wentz to me, I mean, even though he gets hurt, Carson Wentz is going to be one of those guys where, yeah, he has the injury thing happening and the injury thing going. But we know his talent is tops. We know that he is one of the best just in terms of talent in the league, raw talent from a throwing arm perspective in the league. And so you have to go with him in that situation because he's showed up more than Kurt, even with all the injuries. He's played better than Kurt with all the injuries, and that's why, you know, he's a guy who you just look at and say, yeah, he's if he ain't have those injuries, he could be considered a top 5 quarterback in this game, based off everything you've seen from him over the years. So then it's Kurt or Drew Brees. Obviously, if you said in 5 years, then Kurt would be the choice. I mean, because Kurt is probably more likely to be here in 5 years than Drew is, obviously, in his 40s. But if you're talking about to this day, at this very second, obviously we're going to go with Drew Brees. Drew Brees is the best between them. And with that being known, it's not really much of a debate. Drew Brees is always and probably will always be the better quarterback through everything. Then you got Kurt or Kyler Murray. And obviously Kyler Murray, in my opinion. Kyler Murray, we'll talk about him next segment in more detail, but Kyler Murray has one of the opportunities to be one of the best quarterbacks in the game in a few years. He has the talent, and with DeAndre Hopkins there, and then they can get the offensive line straight, they really could be one of the best teams in the coming years because of him. So clearly I would go with Kyler Murray in this situation because just as a talent, he's better than Kirk Cousins, and also his trajectory is also higher, and some people may even take him at this very second right now too over Kirk Cousins in a game in terms of, oh, do I trust you? Because again, if Kirk Cousins wasn't on the Vikings and Kyler Murray was, Vikings might have been able to get a little further than last year. I'm just saying. Just saying. Kirk Cousins, Patrick Mahomes clearly, because Patrick Mahomes, it's going to be very unlikely to ever do a Patrick Mahomes versus, because, I mean, literally, you'll probably take him over everybody. Most people will take him over everybody. And obviously, it's not even close when it comes to that. Even with Russell Wilson or Kirk Cousins, same thing. Russell by far over Kirk. Russell by far over Kirk Cousins. So what about Kirk Cousins or Josh Allen? Both sometimes have decision-making issues, but I think for the most part, everybody can agree that Josh Allen probably has a bigger ceiling at this point. And he has a cannon of an arm. So for me, I look at the two and I'm going to go Josh Allen just because, you know, I don't think there's a big gap currently between the two, but I think there will be. But I do think Josh Allen gets the edge right now to me. Because I honestly look at if Josh Allen was on Minnesota, would they really be that different? Like, I mean, you might see maybe a more of a 1-2 win increase, but I don't think in terms of what happened, anything would be totally different in terms of the result of the team last year. And so I think Josh Allen is the better option, but I do believe and look at the fact that I do think that Kurt is not better than Josh Allen currently. And, you know, we're going to stop there with the games. We're going to stop there. It was a very fun game. Hopefully, you know, you gave your input. Maybe you were thinking about who you thought Kurt or the other guy I had mentioned. It's all fun and games here. You know, we're just trying to keep it loose here on the podcast. But coming up next, we're going to talk about, like I said, Kyler Murray and his superstar potential. And if you're a Saints fan, are you ready for the heel, as in Taysom Hill? All that right here and more on the podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we continued our game of Kurt or who. I probably compared him to about 10 quarterbacks last segment, and obviously a few before the segment previously, so obviously we had a lot of fun with that segment. Might see more games on here. Just, you know, lighten it up, have fun, have a good time on the podcast, because that's what it's about during this time of need for a lot of people and their families, and using the podcast potentially to get away from the issues that are happening in the world today. That's what I'm here for. I'm here for you, to provide you football analysis and football discussions. Talk about a sport that we all love. I'm just here just trying to do my job. So, you know, I'm trying to do what I got to do for you. But the show has to continue on. So now we're going to talk about two quarterbacks to end the show. And first we're going to talk about Kyler Murray. Because I think a lot of people are starting to realize with Kyler Murray, he looks like he has the potential to be a superstar quarterback one day. He has all the talent in the world. He is probably one of the most gifted throwers of the football, one of the best deep throwers in the league. I think he was number one in deep throw accuracy, and also he only had 2 passes that were interceptable in terms of the deep ball out of, I believe, 72. And it seems like to me, Kyler is building the slow momentum of popularity of dang, this man's really good. Like, this man really could be the guy Arizona hasn't had in years since Kurt Warner when they made it to the Super Bowl. Carson Palmer obviously was good when he came, but it was never the same. Kyler Murray is a guy with Kingsbury. Seems like the perfect offensive fit for him in the scheme. It looks like everything is in position to let Kyler Murray, really explode this year. Especially, like I said, now that they have DeAndre Hopkins on their team. With DeAndre Hopkins on their team now, they have this elite number one wide receiver, still with Larry Fitzgerald. And they have a lot of talent. And so with that being known, Kyler Murray's numbers could explode. He could have close to 5,000 yards. He could have 30 plus touchdowns. He has all the potential in the world to be that, to get to that point and to be on that level. And so that clearly, puts Kyler Murray in a great position, because we're talking about Patrick Mahomes now and Deshaun Watson now and Russell Wilson. Kyler Murray could be in line to get a very big deal in the future if he somehow gets Arizona to the playoffs, has monster success in the passing game, and does a lot of things that haven't happened in Arizona for a very long time. Like I said, that offensive line can get right. They have weapons. They really could take off this year. They with Kenyon Drake, Hopkins, Kyler, Kingsbury. It sounds like there's a lot of things in place for the Cardinals to be successful at the end of the day and for them to win. And obviously that's the major goal, obviously, of any team in this league, to win. So if that happens, then clearly that's something that's going to benefit them moving on and all in forward, all in to the point, all in to a successful situation. So definitely keep an eye on Kyler Murray. As they sometimes say, quarterbacks have a sophomore slump, but Kyler Murray is definitely in position to not have a sophomore slump, but be even better than what he was his rookie year when he won Rookie of the Year. And to maybe establish himself as a borderline superstar QB in this league. Kyler could make top 10 by the end of this year and may even be fighting to even crack top 5 potentially, depending on how this year goes for them in the team. Because obviously with Kyler as well, you got to start putting wins together, because obviously if he doesn't win, yeah, it's great you're putting up numbers, but you ain't winning. So we have to see it translate to wins on the field. But if that can happen, Kyler will definitely be thrusted into a place of greatness that he has the potential to reach, because he has one of the best, again, QB talents in the league. And we all knew that coming from Oklahoma and what he did there with Lincoln Riley. So, I have a question for Saints fans, and just any fan. Are you ready for the heel? As in Taysom Hill? I ask because Jay Glazer came out and said it's not a smokescreen. Peyton is preparing to go into next season with Taysom Hill as the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. Now let that sink in a little bit. I'll give you about 10 seconds. Is it sinking in? Now, listen. With the way the world is changing and the league is changing, a QB like Taysom Hill, in my opinion, has a chance to be successful. Because, listen, I understand he's older. He was never that highly touted coming out of college. All of that. He's more of an athlete, not even a quarterback. But do not be surprised if you see Taysom Hill throw a lot more passes this year to show off his passing ability. And don't be surprised if Taysom Hill gets a couple of plays to be quarterback over Drew Brees. Because I'm sure Sean Payton wants to get him some reps and get him more experience. And if he continues to make plays with what he's given in the passing game, then obviously the rumblings will start to grow more. It's not, because the thing about Taysom Hill's situation is not even he's in danger of taking Drew Brees' job. It's just when Drew's gone, Sean thinks, I got my guy. And I think one reason why Sean also wants to do this is because of this. He looks at his skill set. He looks at Lamar. He looks at Kyler. He looks at all these other quarterbacks. Well, he can run like them. So that's not different, even though we may think he's not the best runner out of all of them, but he can make plays with his legs. If he can throw the ball efficiently and not turn the ball over, because think about the offense at the same time now. It's a pop gun offense. It's a lot of short and intermediate passes, on time anticipation throws. It's not a big play offense. If you're saying, hey, Taysom, give me about 50 to 80 yards a game on the ground, and it gives me about 200 through the air with efficient passing and accuracy, I mean, that could work. In today's league, that could work. He could be getting 300 plus yards of all-purpose yards every game because of that, which means he's still having an effective game. And so it's something that definitely I don't think you should sit here and rule out. I think that's why I think Sean Payton has always been intrigued by bringing in Taysom Hill to be the quarterback of the New Orleans Saints. I definitely can see that. Definitely can see that. So I'm just saying, Saints fans, I know that may not be something you want to hear. And I know some of you would rather have Jameis. But it really looks like all momentum is building towards Taysom Hill being the starting quarterback of the New Orleans Saints next season in the 2021-2022 season. And that's all we have here for you on the podcast. Thank you for tuning in and listening for another great show with me today. Please don't forget to review us and subscribe. Leave us a review, stars, all of that. Really appreciate it. Don't forget to follow us on social media. If you're somebody who's looking for a company to grow, GSMC advertises. So if you want to advertise, there's also a link below. And just, hey, appreciate you for coming in, talking football with me for another day. Can't wait to talk to all y'all next time with Ethan on Tuesday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.